like I remember you. I remember you.
Hello there, can you hear me okay? Because I think I've solved the problem of forgetting to unmute my mic. Yeah. What? Echo! Why is it echoing? Well, that's what I get for thinking that I solved the problem. Okay, can you hear me now? And is the echo gone? Okay, I fixed the problem then. Yeah, I decided since, it's winter, we would have a little storm with some rain and thunder along with our fireplace. There's only one Sakura, that's right. If you guys decide you don't want the thunderstorms in that, I can remove it again. Just thought it would be a little nice. Something a little different. So how have you all been? I have missed you all. Albel, I know that you're doing school stuff, and I have faith in you. I believe in you. You can do it. So I'll be honest, I don't even remember reading this book the last time, but I have an index card on page 50, so I'm going to assume that's how far we made it. I haven't watched The Good Place. I think I've watched like the first episode of it, and I didn't get into it. We always worry about things, Albel. I stressed the whole time when I was in school that I wasn't going to get my work done, I wasn't going to get it in, I was going to fuck it up, and I did fine. I mean, if I could go back and tell, younger me that everything would be fine, I would. Yeah, I've missed streaming. But the good bad news is no more overtime at work. And the bad part of that is no overtime, and I was relying on the overtime to stay afloat. But I wanted to work it on my terms. And they've completely cut us off, so we will see how that goes. Definitely be more streaming. Hugs back to all of you too. I wish I could remember the command that I had set up for hugs, but it doesn't seem to want to work. And I've got the chat bot loaded. Oh, okay, that's it. There you go. So say I've got that chat bot loaded up. Woohoo! The hug command still works. Okay, let us begin reading and see how far we can get. If you don't remember the beginning, neither do I. It's okay. This card is on page 50 for some reason. I'm assuming I made it to page 50. First we must open the soda. There. Okay. Now the reading can begin. Ah, said Gandalf. That is a very long story. The beginnings lie back in the Black Years, which only the lore masters now remember. If I were to tell you all that tale, we should still be sitting here when spring had passed into winter. But last night I told you of Sauron the Great, the Dark Lord. The rumors that you have heard are true. He has indeed arisen again and left his hold in Mirkwood and returned to his ancient fastness in the Dark Tower of Mordor. That name even you hobbits have heard of, like a shadow on the borders of old stories. Always after a defeat and a respite, the shadow takes another shape and grows again. Come on, microphone stand. Cooperate with me. There. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black. The enemy is fast becoming very strong. His plans are far from ripe, I think, but they are ripening. We shall be hard put to it. We should be very hard put to it, even if it were not for this dreadful chance. The enemy still lacks one thing, to give him strength and knowledge to beat down all resistance, break the last defenses, and cover all the lands in a second darkness. He lacks the One Ring. The three fairest of all, the elf lords hid from him, and his hand never touched them nor sullied them. 7 the dwarf kings possessed, but 3 he has recovered, and the others the dragons have consumed. 9 he gave to mortal men, proud and great, and so ensnared them. Long ago they fell under the dominion of the One, and they became ring-wraiths, shadows under his great shadow, his most terrible servants. Long ago. It is many a year since the 9 walked abroad. Yet who knows? As the shadow grows once more, they too may walk again. But come, we will not speak of such things even in the morning of the Shire. So it is now. The 9 he has gathered to himself, the 7 also, or else they are destroyed. The 3 are hidden still, but that no longer troubles him. He only needs the 1, for he made that ring himself. It is his, and he let a great part of his own former power pass into it, so that he could rule all the others. If he recovers it, then he will command them all again, wherever they are, even the 3. And all that has been wrought with them will be laid bare, and he will be stronger than ever. And this is the dreadful chance, Frodo. He believed that the one had perished, that the elves had destroyed it, as should have been done. But he knows now that it has not perished, that it has been found. So he is seeking it, and all his thought is bent on it. It is his great hope and our great fear. Why wasn't it destroyed? Cried Frodo. And how did the enemy ever come to lose it if he was so strong, and it was so precious to him? He clutched the ring in his hand, as if he saw already dark fingers stretching out to seize it. It was taken from him, said Gandalf. The strength of the elves to resist him was greater long ago, and not all men were estranged from them. The men of Westerness came to their end. That is a chapter of ancient history which it might be good to recall, for there was sorrow then too, and gathering dark, but great valor and great deeds that were not wholly vain. One day, perhaps, I will tell you all the tale, or you will hear it told in full by one who knows it best. But for the moment, since most of all you need to know how this thing came to you, and that will be tale enough, this is all that I will say. It was Gil-galad, Elven King, and Elendil of Westerness who overthrew Sauron, though they themselves perished in the deed. And Isildur, Elendil's son, cut the ring from Sauron's hand and took it for his own. Then Sauron was vanquished, and his spirit fled and was hidden for long years, until his shadow took shape again in Mirkwood. But the ring was lost. It fell into the great river, Anduin, and vanished. For Isildur was marching north along the east banks of the river, and near the Gladden fields he was waylaid by the orcs of the mountains, and almost all his folk were slain. He leapt into the waters, but the ring slipped from his finger as he swam, and then the orcs saw him and killed him with arrows. Gandalf paused. And there, in the dark pools, amid the Gladden fields, he said, the ring passed out of knowledge and legend, and even so much of its history is known now only to a few, and the council of the wise could discover no more. But at last I can carry on the story, I think. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great rivers on the edge of Wilderland a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the Stores, for they loved the river, and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. There was among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of that family was called Smeagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools. He burrowed under trees and growing plants. He tunneled into green mounds and ceased to look at the hilltops, or the leaves on trees, or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward. He had a friend called Deagle, of similar sort, sharper-eyed but not as quick and strong. On a time they took a boat and went down to the Gladden fields, where there were great beds of iris and flowering reeds. There Smeagol got out and went nosing about the banks, but Deagle sat in the boat and fished. Suddenly a great fish took his hook, and before he knew where he was dragged out and down into the water, to the bottom. Then he let go of his line, for he thought he saw something shining in the riverbed, and holding his breath, he grabbed at it. Then up he came sputtering, with weeds in his hair and a handful of mud, and he swam to the bank, and behold, when he washed the mud away, there in his hand lay a beautiful golden ring, and it shone and glittered in the sun, so that his heart was glad. But Smeagol had been watching him from behind a tree, and as Deagle gloated over the ring, Smeagol came softly up behind. Give us that, Deagle, my love, said Smeagol over his friend's shoulder. Why? Said Deagle. Because it's my birthday, my love, and I wants it, said Smeagol. I don't care, said Deagle. I have given you a present already, more than I could afford. I found this, and I'm going to keep it. Oh, you are indeed, my love, said Smeagol, and he caught Deagle by the throat and strangled him, because the gold looked so bright and beautiful. Then he put the ring on his finger. No one ever found out what had become of Deagle. He was murdered far from home, and his body was cunningly hidden. But Smeagol returned alone, and he found that none of his family could see him when he was wearing the ring. He was very pleased with his discovery, and he concealed it, and he used it to find out secrets, and he put his knowledge to crooked and malicious use. He became sharp-eyed and keen-eared for all that was hurtful. The ring had given him power according to his stature. It is not to be wondered at that he became very unpopular and was shunned, when visible, by all his relations. They kicked him, and he bit their feet. He took to thieving and going about muttering to himself and gurgling in his throat. So they called him Gollum, and cursed him, and told him to go far away. And his grandmother, desiring peace, expelled him from the family and turned him out of her hole. He wandered in loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness of the world, and he journeyed up the river, till he came to a stream that flowed down from the mountains, and he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers, and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and as he was bending over a pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazzling light from the water painted his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. Then, for the last time, he looked up and shook his fist at her. But as he lowered his eyes, he saw far above the tops of the misty mountains out of which the stream came. And he thought suddenly, it would be cool and shady under those mountains. The sun could not watch me there. The roots of those mountains must be roots indeed. There must be great secrets buried there which have not been discovered since the beginning. So he journeyed by night up into the highlands, and he found a little cave out of which the dark stream ran, and he wormed his way like a maggot into the heart of the hills and vanished out of all knowledge. The ring went into the shadows with him, and even the Maker, when his power had begun to grow again, could learn nothing of it. Gollum? Cried Frodo. Gollum? Do you mean that this is the very Gollum creature that Bilbo met? How loathsome. I think it is a sad story, said the wizard, and it might have happened to others, even to some hobbits that I have known. I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly, said Frodo with some heat. What an abominable notion. It is true all the same, replied Gandalf. About their origins, at any rate, I know more than hobbits do themselves, and even Bilbo's story suggests the kinship. There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar. They understood one another remarkably well, very much better than a hobbit would understand, say, a dwarf, or an orc, or even an elf. Think of the riddles they both knew, for one thing. Yes, said Frodo, though other folks besides hobbits ask riddles, and of much the same sort. And hobbits don't cheat. Gollum meant to cheat all the time. He was just trying to put poor Bilbo off his guard, and I dare say it amused his wickedness to start a game which might end in providing him with an easy victim, but if he lost, would not hurt him. Only too true, I fear, said Gandalf. But there was something else in it, I think, which you don't see yet. Even Gollum was not wholly ruined. He had proved tougher than even one of the wise would have guessed, as a hobbit might. There was a little corner of his mind that was still his own, and light came through it as though a chink in the dark. light out of the past. It was actually pleasant, I think, to hear a kindly voice again, bringing up memories of wind and trees and sun on the grass and such forgotten things. But that, of course, would only make the evil part of him angrier in the end, unless it could be conquered, unless it could be cured. Gandalf sighed. Alas, there is little hope of that for him. Yet not no hope. No. Not though he possessed the ring so long, almost as far back as he can remember. For it was long since he had worn it much. In the black darkness it was seldom needed. Certainly he had never faded. He was thin and tough still. But the thing was eating up his mind, of course, and the torment had become almost unbearable. All the great secrets under the mountains had turned out to be just empty night. There was nothing more to find out, nothing worth doing, only nasty furtive eating and resentful remembering. He had altogether wretched. He hated the dark, and he hated light more. He hated everything, and the ring most of all. "What do you mean?" said Frodo. Surely the ring was his precious and the only thing he cared for. But if he hated it, why didn't he get rid of it or go away and leave it? "You ought to begin to understand, Frodo, after all you have heard," said Gandalf. He hated it and loved it, as he hated and loved himself. He could not get rid of it. He had no will left in the matter. A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most he plays with the idea of handing it on to someone else's care, and that only at an early stage, when it first begins to grip. But as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it. He needed all my help, too. And even so, he would never have just forsaken it or cast it aside. It was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left him. "What, just in time to meet Bilbo?" said Frodo. "Wouldn't an orc have suited it better?" "It is no laughing matter," said Gandalf. "Not for you. It was the strangest event in the whole history of the ring so far. Bilbo's arrival just at that time and putting his hand on it blindly in the dark. There was more than one power at work, Frodo. The ring was trying to get back to its master. It had slipped from Isildur's hand and betrayed him. Then when a chance came, it caught poor Deagle, and he was murdered. After that Gollum, and it had devoured him. It could make no further use of him. He was too small and mean. And as long as it stayed with him, he would never leave his deep pool again. So now, when its master was awake once more and sending out his dark thought from Mirkwood, it abandoned Gollum, only to be picked up by the most unlikely person imaginable, Bilbo from the Shire. Behind that, there was something else at work, beyond any design of the ringmaker. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and not by its maker. In which case, you also were meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought. "It is not," said Frodo, "though I am not sure that I understand you. But now that you have learned all this about the ring and about Gollum, do you really know it all, or are you just guessing still?" Gandalf looked at Frodo, and his eyes glinted. "I knew much, and I have learned much," he answered. "But I am not going to give an account of all my doings to you. The history of Elendil and Isildur and the One Ring is known to all the wise. Your ring is shown to be that one ring by the fire writing alone, apart from any other evidence." "And when did you discover that?" asked Frodo, interrupting. "Just now in this room, of course," answered the wizard sharply. "But I expected to find it. I have come back from dark journeys and long search to make that final test. It is the last proof, and all is now only too clear. Making out Gollum's part and fitting it into the gap in the history required some thought. I may have started with guesses about Gollum, but I am not guessing now. I know. I have seen him. You have seen Gollum, exclaimed Frodo in amazement. Yes, the obvious thing to do, of course, if one could. I tried long ago, but I have managed it at last. Then what happened after Bilbo escaped from him? Do you know that? Not so clearly. What I have told you is what Gollum was willing to tell, though not, of course, in the way I have reported it. Gollum is a liar, and you have to sift his words. For instance, he called the ring his birthday present, and he stuck to that. He said it came from his grandmother, who had lots of beautiful things of that kind. It is a ridiculous story. I have no doubt that Smeagol's grandmother was a matriarch, a great person in her way, but to talk of her possessing many elven rings was absurd, and as for giving them away, it was a lie. But a lie with a grain of truth. The murder of Deagle haunted Gollum, and he had made up a defense, repeating it to his precious over and over again as he gnawed bones in the dark, till he almost believed it. It was his birthday. Deagle ought to have given the ring to him. It had previously turned up just so as to be a present. It was his birthday present, and so on and so on. I endured him as long as I could, but the truth was desperately important, and in the end I had to be harsh. I put the fear of fire on him, and wrung the true story out of him bit by bit, together with much sniveling and snarling. He thought he was misunderstood and ill-used, but when he had at last told me his history, as far as the end of the riddle game and Bilbo's escape, he would not say any more, except in dark hints. Some other fear was on him greater than mine. He muttered that he was going to get his own back. People would see if he would stand and be kicked, and driven into a hole, and then robbed. Gollum had good friends now, good friends and very strong. They would help him. Baggins would pay for it. That was his chief thought. He hated Bilbo and cursed his name. What is more, he knew where he came from. But how did he find that out? Asked Frodo. Well, as for the name, Bilbo very foolishly told Gollum himself, and after that it would not be difficult to discover his country once Gollum came out. Oh yes, he came out. His longing for the ring proved stronger than his fear of the orcs, or even of the light. After a year or two he left the mountains. You see, though still bound by desire of it, the ring was no longer devouring him. He began to revive a little. He felt old, terribly old, yet less timid, and he was mortally hungry. Light of sun and moon, he still feared and hated, and he always will, I think, but he was cunning. He found he could hide from daylight and moonshine, and make his way swiftly and softly by dead of night with his pale cold eyes, and catch small frightened or unwary things. He grew stronger and bolder with new food and new air. He found his way into Mirkwood, as one would expect. Is that where you found him? Asked Frodo. I saw him there, answered Gandalf. But before that he had wandered far, following Bilbo's trail. It was difficult to learn anything from him for certain, and his talk was constantly interrupted by curses and threats. What had it got in its pocketses? He said. It wouldn't say no, precious. Little cheat. Not a fair question. It cheated first, it did. It broke the rules. We ought to have squeezed it. Yes, precious, and we will, precious. That is a sample of his talk. I don't suppose you want any more. I had weary days of it, but from hints dropped amongst the snarls I even gathered that his padding feet had taken him at last to Esgaroth, and even to the streets of Dale, listening secretly and peering in. Well, the news of the great events went far and wide in Wilderland, and many had heard Bilbo's name and knew where he came from. We had made no secret of our return journey to his home in the west. Gollum's sharp ears would soon learn what he wanted. Then why didn't he track Bilbo further? Asked Frodo. Why didn't he come to the Shire? Ah, said Gandalf, now we come to it. I think Gollum tried to. He set out and came back westward as far as the Great River, but then he turned aside. He was not daunted by the distance, I am sure. No, something else drove him away. So my friends think, those that hunted him for me. The wood elves tracked him first, an easy task for them, for his trail was still fresh then. Through Mirkwood and back again it led them, though they never caught him. The wood was full of the rumor of him, dreadful tales even among beasts and birds. The woodman said that there was some new terror abroad, a ghost that drank blood. It climbed trees to find nests. It crept into holes to find the young. It slipped through windows to find cradles. But at the western edge of Mirkwood the trail turned away. It wandered off southwards and passed out of the wood elf's ken and was lost. And then I made a great mistake. Yes, Frodo, and not the first, though I fear it may prove the worst. I let the matter be. I let him go, for I had much else to think of at that time, and I still trusted the lore of Saruman. Well, that was years ago. I have paid for it since with many dark and dangerous days. The trail was long cold when I took it up again after Bilbo left here, and my search would have been in vain but for the help that I had from a friend, Aragorn, the greatest traveler and huntsman of this age of the world. Together we sought for Gollum down the whole length of Wilderland, without hope and without success. But at last, when I had given up the chase and turned to other parts, Gollum was found. My friend returned out of the great perils, bringing the miserable creature with him. What he had been doing he would not say. He only wept and called us cruel, and with many a Gollum in his throat. And when we pressed him, he whined and cringed and rubbed his long hands, licking his fingers as if they pained him, as if he remembered some old torture. But I am afraid there is no possible doubt. He had made his slow, sneaking way, step by step, mile by mile, south, down at last to the land of Mordor. A heavy silence fell in the room. Frodo could hear his heart beating. Even outside, everything seemed still. No sound of Sam's shears could now be heard. Yes, to Mordor, said Gandalf. Oops. Sorry about that. Yes, to Mordor, said Gandalf. Alas, Mordor draws all wicked things, and the dark power was bending all its will to gather them there. The ring of the enemy would leave its mark too, leave him open to the summons, and all folks were whispering then of the new shadow in the south and its hatred of the west. There were his fine friends who would help him in his revenge. Wretched fool, in that land he would learn much, too much for his comfort. And sooner or later, as he lurked and pried on the borders, he would be caught and taken for examination. That was the way of it, I fear. When he was found, he had already been there long, and was on his way back, on some errand of mischief. But that does not matter much now. His worst mischief is done. Yes, alas, through him the enemy has learned that the one has been found again. He knows where Isildur fell. He knows where Gollum found his ring. He knows that it is a great ring, for it gave long life. He knows that it is not one of the three, for they have never been lost, and they endure no evil. He knows that it is not one of the 7, or the 9, for they are accounted for. He knows that it is the one, and he has at last heard, I think, of hobbits and the Shire. The Shire. He may be seeking for it now, if he has not already found out where it lies. Indeed, Frodo, I fear that he may even think that the long unannounced name of Baggins has become important. But this is terrible, cried Frodo. Far worse than the worst that I imagined from your hints and warnings. Oh, Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid. What am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had a chance. Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. I am sorry, said Frodo, but I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum. You have not seen him, Gandalf broke in. No, and I don't want to, said Frodo. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now at any rate he is as bad as an orc or just an enemy. He deserves death. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum will be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not the least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The Wood Elves have him in prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts. All the same, said Frodo, even if Bilbo could not kill Gollum, I wish he had not kept the ring. I wish he had never found it, and that I had not got it. Why did you let me keep it? Why didn't you make me throw it away or destroy it? Let you? Make you, said the wizard. Haven't you been listening to all that I have said? You were not thinking of what you were saying. But as for throwing it away, that was obviously wrong. These rings have a way of being found. In evil hands, it might have done great evil. Worst of all, it might have fallen into the hands of the enemy. Indeed, it certainly would, for this is the one, and he is exerting all his power to find it or draw it to himself. Of course, my dear Frodo, it was dangerous for you, and that has troubled me deeply. But there was so much at stake that I had to take some risk. Though even when I was far away, there has never been a day when the Shire has not been guarded by watchful eyes. As long as you never used it, I did not think that the ring would have any lasting effect on you. Not for evil, not at any rate for a very long time. And you must remember that 9 years ago, when I last saw you, I still knew little for certain. But why not destroy it, as you said should have been done long ago, cried Frodo again. If you had warned me or even sent me a message, I would have done away with it. Would you? How would you do that? Have you ever tried? No, but I suppose one could hammer it or melt it. Try, said Gandalf. Try now. Frodo drew the ring out of his pocket again and looked at it. It now appeared plain and smooth, without mark or device that he could see. The gold looked very fair and pure, and Frodo thought how rich and beautiful was its color, how perfect was its roundness. It was an admirable thing and altogether precious. When he took it out, he had intended to fling it from him into the very hottest part of the fire. But he found now that he could not do so, not without a great struggle. He weighed the ring in his hand, hesitating and forcing himself to remember all that Gandalf had told him. And then with an effort of will he made a movement, as if to cast it away, but he found that he had already put it back in his pocket. Gandalf laughed grimly. You see? Already you too, Frodo, cannot easily let it go, nor will to damage it. And I could not make you, except by force, which would break your mind. But as for breaking the ring, force is useless. Even if you took it and struck it with a heavy sledgehammer, it would make no dent in it. It cannot be unmade by your hands, nor by mine. Your small fire, of course, would not melt even ordinary gold. This ring has already passed through it unscathed and even unheeded. But there is no smith's forge in this shire that could change it at all. Not even the anvils and furnaces of the dwarves could do that. It has been said that dragon fire could melt and consume the rings of power. But there is not there ever any dragon, not even Ankalagon the Black, who could have burned the One Ring, the ruling ring, for that was made by Sauron himself. There is only one way, to find the cracks of doom in the depths of Orodruin, the Fire Mountain, and cast the ring in there. If you really wish to destroy it, to put it beyond the grasp of the enemy forever. I do really wish to destroy it, cried Frodo. Or, well, to have it destroyed. I am not made for perilous quests. I wish I'd never seen the ring. Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf. You may be sure that it was not for any merit any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom, at any rate. But you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wits as you have. But I have so little of any of these things. You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring? No, cried Gandalf, springing to his feet. With that ring I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. His eyes flashed, and his face was lit as by a fire within. Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity for weakness, and the desire for strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe and used. The wish to wield it will be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me. He went to the window and drew aside the curtains and the shutters. Sunlight streamed back again into the room. Sam passed along the path outside, whistling. And now, said the wizard, turning back to Frodo, the decision lies with you. But I will always help you. He laid his hand on Frodo's shoulder. I will help you bear this burden as long as it is yours to bear. But we must do something soon. The enemy is moving. There was a long silence. Gandalf sat down again and puffed at his pipe, as if lost in thought. His eyes seemed closed, but under the lids he was watching Frodo intently. Frodo gazed fixedly at the red embers on the hearth until they filled all his vision, and he seemed to be looking down into profound wells of fire. He was thinking of the fabled cracks of doom and the terror of the fiery mountain. Well, said Gandalf at last, what are you thinking about? Have you decided what to do? No, answered Frodo, coming back to himself out of the darkness, and finding to his surprise that it was not dark, and that out of the window he could see the sunlit garden. Or perhaps yes. As far as I understand what you have said, I suppose I must keep the ring and guard it, at least for the present, whatever it may do to me. Whatever it may do, it will be slow to evil, if you keep it with you. If you keep it with that purpose, said Gandalf. I hope so, said Frodo. But I hope that you may find some other better keeper soon. But in the meanwhile, it seems that I am a danger to all that live near me. I cannot keep the ring and stay here. I ought to leave Bag End, leave the Shire, leave everything and go away. He sighed. I should like to save the Shire if I could, though there have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind, safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of going away, but I imagine that as a kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's, or better, ending in peace. But this would mean exile, a flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me. And I suppose I must go alone if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small, and very uprooted, and, well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible. He did not tell Gandalf, but as he was speaking, a great desire to follow Bilbo flamed up in his heart. To follow Bilbo, and even perhaps to find him again. It was so strong that it overcame his fear, and he could almost have run out there and ran then down the road without his hat, as Bilbo had done on a similar morning long ago. "My dear Frodo," exclaimed Gandalf, "hobbits really are amazing creatures, as I have said before. You can learn all that there is to know about their ways in a month, and yet after 100 years they can still surprise you at a pinch. I hardly expected to get such an answer, not even from you." But Bilbo made no mistake in choosing his heir, though he little thought how important it would prove. "I am afraid you are right. The ring will not be able to stay hidden in the Shire much longer, and for your own sake, as well as for others, you will have to go and leave the name of Baggins behind you. That name will not be safe to have outside the Shire or in the wild. I will give you a traveling name now. When you go as Mr. Underhill. But I don't think you need to go alone. Not if you know of anyone you can trust and who would be willing to go by your side, and that you would be willing to take into unknown perils. But if you look for a companion, be careful in choosing, and be careful of what you say, even to your closest friends. The enemy has many spies and many ways of hearing." Suddenly he stopped as if listening. Frodo became aware that all was very quiet, inside and outside. Gandalf crept to one side of the window. Then with a dart he sprang to the sill and thrust a long arm out and downward. There was a squawk, and up came Sam Gamgee's curly head hauled by one ear. Well, bless my beard," said Gandalf. "Sam Gamgee, is it? Now what may you be doing?" "Lord bless you, Mr. Gandalf, sir," said Sam. "Nothing. Leastwise, I was just trimming the grass border under the window, if you follow me." He picked up his shears and exhibited them as evidence. "I don't," said Gandalf grimly. "It is some time since I last heard the sound of your shears. How long have you been eavesdropping?" "Eavesdropping, sir? I don't follow you, begging your pardon. There ain't no eaves at Bag End, and that's a fact." "Don't be a fool. What have you heard, and why did you listen?" Gandalf's eyes flashed, and his brow stuck out with bristles. "Mr. Frodo, sir," cried Sam, quaking. "Don't let him hurt me, sir. Don't let him turn me into anything unnatural. Me old dad would take on so. I meant no harm on my honor, sir." "He won't hurt you," said Frodo, hardly able to keep from laughing, though he was started shaking and rather puzzled. "He knows as well as I do that you mean no harm. But just you up and answer his questions straight away." "Well, sir," said Sam, dithering a little, "I heard a deal that I didn't rightly understand about an enemy, and rings, and Mr. Bilbo, sir, and dragons, and a fiery mountain, and elves, sir. I listened because I couldn't help myself, if you know what I mean. Lord bless me, sir, but I do love tales of that sort. And I believe them, too, whatever Ted may say. Elves, sir, I would dearly love to see them. Couldn't you take me to see the elves, sir, when you go?" Suddenly Gandalf laughed. "Come inside," he shouted, and putting out both his arms, he lifted the astonished Sam, shears, grass clippings and all, right through the window and stood him on the floor. "Take you to see elves, eh?" he said, eyeing Sam closely, but with a smile flickering on his face. "So you heard that Mr. Frodo was going away?" "I did, sir, and that's why I choked, which you heard seemingly. I tried not to, sir, but it burst out of me. I was so upset." "It can't be helped, Sam," said Frodo sadly. He had suddenly realized that flying from the Shire would mean more painful partings than merely saying farewell to the familiar comforts of Bag End. I shall have to go, but... And here he looked hard at Sam. If you really care about me, you will keep that dead secret. See, if you don't, if you even breathe a word of what you've heard here, then I hope Gandalf will turn you into a spotted toad and fill the garden full of grass snakes. Sam fell on his knees, trembling. Get up, Sam, said Gandalf. I have thought of something better than that. Something to shut your mouth and punish you properly for listening. You should go away with Mr. Frodo. Me, sir, cried Sam, springing up like a dog invited for a walk. Me go and see elves and all. Hooray, he shouted, and then burst into tears. That is the end of that chapter, which apparently was chapter 2, because the next one says chapter 3. Hot tea, thank you for the follow. For some reason the sounds aren't working on alerts, so I did not see that you had followed, but thank you very much and welcome. I should take a drink myself. Okay. Let's see how far we get in chapter 3. You ought to go quietly, and you ought to go soon, said Gandalf. 2 or 3 weeks had passed, and still Frodo made no sign of getting ready to go. I know, but it is difficult to do both, he objected. If I just vanish like Bilbo, the tale will be all over the Shire in no time. Of course you mustn't vanish, said Gandalf. That wouldn't do at all. I said soon, not instantly. If you can think of any way of slipping out of the Shire without its being generally known, it will be worth a little delay, but you must not delay too long. What about the autumn, on or after our birthday? Asked Frodo. I think I could probably make some arrangements by then. To tell the truth, he was very reluctant to start, now that it had come to the point. Bag End seemed a very desirable residence than it had for years, and he wanted to savor as much as he could of his last summer in the Shire. When autumn came, he knew that part at least of his heart would think more kindly of journeying, as it always did at that season. He had indeed privately made up his mind to leave on his 50th birthday, Bilbo's 128th. It seemed somehow the proper day on which to set out and follow him. Following Bilbo was uppermost in his mind, and the one thing that made the thought of leaving bearable. He thought as little as possible about the ring, and where it might lead him in the end. But he did not tell all his thoughts to Gandalf. What the wizard guessed was always difficult to tell. He looked at Frodo and smiled. Very well, he said. I think that will do, but it must not be any later. I am getting very anxious. In the meanwhile, do take care and don't let any hint of where you are going. And see that Sam Gamgee does not talk. If he does, I really shall turn him into a toad. As for where I am going, said Frodo, it will be difficult to give that away, for I have no clear idea myself yet. Don't be absurd, said Gandalf. I am not warning you against leaving an address at the post office, but you are leaving the Shire, and that should not be known until you are far away. And you must go, or at least set out, either north, south, east, or west, and the direction should certainly not be known. I have been so taken up with the thoughts of leaving Bag End, and of saying farewell, that I have never even considered the direction, said Frodo. For where am I to go? And by what shall I steer? What is to be my quest? Bilbo went to find a treasure, there and back again. But I go to lose one, and not return, as far as I can see. But you cannot see very far, said Gandalf. Neither can I. It may be your task to find the cracks of doom, but that quest may be for others. I do not know. At any rate, you are not ready for that long road yet. No, indeed, said Frodo. But in the meantime, what course am I to take? Towards danger, but not too rashly, nor too straight, answered the wizard. If you want my advice, make for Rivendell. That journey should not prove too perilous, though the road is less easy than it was, and it will grow worse as the year fails. Rivendell, said Frodo. Very good. I will go east, and I will make for Rivendell. I will take Sam to visit the elves. He will be delighted. He spoke lightly, but his heart was moved suddenly with a desire to see the home of Elrond Half-Elven, and breathe the air of that deep valley where many of the fair folk still dwelt in peace. Alright, I'm gonna take a very quick break. Go get Mom ready for bed, give her pills and her shots. I should not be gone for too long, and then I will be back and we will continue with our reading.
holding back for anyone. Waiting for the rain.
Hey, just need to tell you something that just can't wait. Hey, maybe you'll ride away or maybe you'll stay. But hey, this old guitar and me been thinking for days how to say that our love don't care too much for the unpaid bills on the bedroom floor. Our love lives on cheap wine and singing songs to a wasted sunrise. With you, with you I feel like I am. With you, with you I feel like I am somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am somebody in control, like I feel it in my bones, like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am. Won't you come with me from New York to LA? Hey, we'll play this song in every city we stay. And hey, maybe we'll stream 1,000,000 times in one day. Be on our way. Hey, 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 hey. Our love don't care too much for the unpaid bills on the bedroom floor. Our love lives on cheap wine and singing songs to a wasted sunrise. With you, with you I feel like I'm. With you, with you I feel like I am somebody, somebody, somebody. Somebody, somebody, somebody. Somebody in control, like I feel it in my bones, like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am. So we made it in New York and LA, and how they sang in every city we played. I hear we streamed 1,000,000 times yesterday. Oh, how things change, and how the years keep ticking away, and how I wish that you were with me today. 'Cause I'd give anything to do it again. Oh, how we've changed. With you I feel like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I'm somebody in control, like I feel it in my bones, like I'm somebody, somebody, somebody. With you I feel like I am.
On most nights, I'm just wearing my pajamas, staying up too late, 'cause I'm watching Futurama, thinking where's my drama, my life's no melodrama, leave it off the screen, 'cause it's got no genre. Sometimes I call my mama, ring, yeah, she's always my armor. I want to fly away, far from my mistakes. My baggage has too much weight, hey, hey. So my bed is where I stay. Tell the clouds that I say hey. to fly away, far from my mistakes. My baggage has too much weight, so my bed is where I stay. Tell the clouds that I say we've been sitting at the end of the moon. Should we jump or is it too soon? Jump or is it too soon? Jump or is it too soon? The cosmos look nice, I'm sure they're paradise, but I'll stay here with you. Should we jump or is it too soon? Jump or is it too soon? Look to the stars and do you think they are too far? Look to the stars and do you think they tell us who we are? Should we jump or is it too soon? Should we jump or is it too soon? I've been thinking of my time here and all the times I lied to myself, under the sun, yeah, under the sun. Thinking of my time here and all the times I lied to myself. Where did the fun go? I've been sitting in a race and I know that I misbehaved, the time will do. But I promise you we will sit right here until these turns are through. Should we jump, or is it too soon? Look to the stars and do you think they are too far? Look to the stars and do you think they tell us who we are? Should we jump or is it too soon? Should we jump or is it too soon? I've been thinking of my time here and all the times I lied to myself, under the sun, yeah, under the sun. Thinking of my time here and all the times I lied to myself. Where did the fun go? It's cold outside. It's the middle of the night and I pull my scarf down tight. I can feel this snow bite. We watch the starlight. They shine bright as we hold on to this tight. No one leaves cause we might not fight. Another night like this. Another night like this. We might live, we might love, we might know. Mostly we grow. Another night like this. Another night like this. We might live, we might love, we don't know. But mostly we grow. Mostly we grow. We might live, we might love, we don't know. But mostly we grow. Mostly mostly we grow.
And we are back, friends. Sorry that took a little longer than I thought it would. But the mama is all tucked into bed now. Drummond, hello. It's been a while, friend. I'm glad to see you here. I hope that you are well. Karasutra has been hugging everyone. Hugs are always good. Thank you for the host album. Where did I put the book down? Oh, there it is. Step 1 of reading books. Remember where you put it down. Yeah, I should take a drink. Gotta stay hydrated. Okay, now to continue with our story. Wait, first I have to adjust the mic stand. I think I figured out what's wrong. Prepare before the string. Ever. Never. Alright, there. I think that's the right height. I don't have to, bend my neck. Okay. Yes, get cozy for some story time sleeps. I even remember where I left off this time. Okay. One summer evening, an astonishing piece of news reached the ivy bush and green dragon. Giants and other portents on the borders of the Shire were forgotten for more important matters. Mr. Frodo was selling Bag End. Indeed, he had already sold it to the Sackville Bagginses. For a fair nice bit, too, said some. At a bargain price, said others. And that's more likely when Mistress Lobelia's the buyer. Otho had died some years before, at the ripe but disappointing age of 102. Just why Mr. Frodo was selling his beautiful hole was even more debatable than the price. A few held the theory, supported by the nods and hints of Mr. Baggins himself, that Frodo's money was running out. He was going to leave Hobbiton and live in a quiet way on the proceeds of the sale down in Buckland among his Brandybuck relations. As far from the Sackville Bagginses as may be, some added. But so firmly fixed had the notion of the immeasurable wealth of the Bagginses of Bag End become that most found this hard to believe, harder than any other reason or unreason that their fancy could suggest. To most it suggested a dark and yet unrevealed plot by Gandalf. Though he kept himself very quiet and did not go about by day, it was well known that he was hiding up in the Bag End. But without a removal might fit in with the designs of his wizardry. There was no doubt about the fact. Frodo Baggins was going back to Buckland. Yes, I shall be moving this autumn, he said. Mary Brandybuck is looking out for a nice little hole for me, or perhaps a small house. As a matter of fact, with Mary's help, he had already chosen and bought a little house at Crickhollow, in the country beyond Bucklebury. To all but Sam, he pretended he was going to settle down there permanently. The decision to set out eastwards had suggested the idea to him, for Buckland was on the eastern borders of the Shire, and as he had lived there in childhood, his going back would at least seem credible. Gandalf stayed in the Shire for over 2 months. Then one evening, at the end of June, soon after Frodo's plan had been finally arranged, he suddenly announced that he was going off again next morning. Only for a short while, I hope, he said. But I am going down beyond the southern border to get some news if I can. I have been idle longer than I should. He spoke lightly, but it seemed to Frodo that he looked rather worried. "Has anything happened?" he asked. "Well, no, but I have heard something that has made me anxious and needs looking into. If I think it necessary for all of you to come at once, I shall come back immediately, or at least send word. In the meantime, stick to your plan, but be more careful than ever, especially of the ring. Let me impress on you once more, don't use it." He went off at dawn. "I may be back any day," he said. "At the very least, I shall come back for the farewell party. I think after all you may need my company on the road." At first Frodo was a good deal disturbed, and wondered often what Gandalf could have heard, but his uneasiness wore off, and in the fine weather he forgot his troubles for a while. The Shire had seldom seen so fair a summer, or so rich an autumn. The trees were laden with apples, honey was dripping in the combs, and the corn was tall and full. Autumn was well under way before Frodo began to worry about Gandalf again. September was passing, and there was still no news of him. The birthday and the removal drew nearer, and still he did not come, or send word. Bag End began to be busy. Some of Frodo's friends came to stay, and of course his special friends Pippin Took and Merry Brandybuck. Between them they turned the whole place upside down. On September 20th, 2 covered carts went off laden to Buckland, conveying the furniture and goods that Frodo had not sold to his new home by way of the Brandywine Bridge. The next day Frodo became really anxious and kept a constant lookout for Gandalf. Thursday, his birthday morning, dawned as fair and clear as it had long ago for Bilbo's great party. Still Gandalf did not appear. In the evening Frodo gave his farewell feast. It was quite small, just a dinner for himself and his 4 helpers. But he was troubled and felt in no mood for it. The thought that he would so soon have to part with his young friends weighed on his heart. He wondered how he would break it to them. The 4 younger hobbits were, however, in high spirits, and the party soon became very cheerful in spite of Gandalf's absence. The dining room was bare except for a table and chairs, but the food was good, and there was good wine. Frodo's wine had not been included in the sale to the Saxville Bagginses. "Whatever happens to the rest of my stuff when the SBs get their claws on it, at any rate I have found a good home for this," said Frodo as he drained his glass. It was the last drop of old Wynyards. When they had sung many songs and talked of many things they had done together, they toasted Bilbo's birthday, and they drank his health and Frodo's together according to Frodo's custom. Then they went out for a sniff of air and glimpse of the stars, and then they went to bed. Frodo's party was over, and Gandalf had not come. The next morning they were busy packing another cart with the remainder of the luggage. Merry took charge of this and drove off with Fatty, that is Fredegar Bolger. "Someone must get there and warm the house before you arrive," said Merry. "Well, see you later, the day after tomorrow, if you don't go to sleep on the way." Folko went home after lunch, but Pippin remained behind. Frodo was restless and anxious, listening in vain for a sound of Gandalf. He decided to wait until nightfall. After that, if Gandalf wanted him urgently, he would go to Crickhollow, and might even get there first. For Frodo was going on foot. His plan, for pleasure and a last look at the Shire as much as any other reason, was to walk from Hobbiton to Buckleberry Ferry, taking it fairly easy. "I shall get myself a bit into training, too," he said, looking at himself in a dusty mirror in the long, empty hall. He had not done any strenuous walking for a long time, and the reflection looked rather flabby, he thought. After lunch, the Saxville Bagginses, Lobelia and her sandy-haired son, Lotho, turned up, much to Frodo's annoyance. "Ours at last," said Lobelia as she stepped inside. It was not polite, nor strictly true, for the sale of Bag End did not take effect until midnight. But Lobelia can perhaps be forgiven. She had been obliged to wait about 77 years longer for Bag End than she had once hoped, and she was now 100 years old. Anyway, she had come to see that nothing she had paid for had been carried off, and she wanted the keys. It took a long while to satisfy her, as she had brought a complete inventory with her and went right through it. In the end she departed with Lotho and the spare key, and the promise that the other key should be left at the Gamgees in Bagshot Row. She snorted, and showed plainly that she thought the Gamgees capable of plundering the whole during the night. Frodo did not offer her any tea. He took his own tea with Pippin and Sam Gamgee in the kitchen. It had been officially announced that Sam was coming to Buckland to do for Mr. Frodo and look after his bit of garden, an arrangement that was approved by the gaffer, though it did not console him for the prospect of having Lobelia as a neighbor. "Our last meal at Bag End," said Frodo, pushing back his chair. They left the washing up for Lobelia. Pippin and Sam strapped up their 3 packs and piled them in the porch. Pippin went out for a last stroll in the garden. Sam disappeared. The sun went down. Bag End seemed sad and gloomy and disheveled. Frodo wandered round the familiar rooms and saw the light of the sunset fade on the walls and shadows creep up out of the corners. It grew slowly dark indoors. He went out and walked down to the gate at the bottom of the path, and then on a short way down the hill road. He half expected to see Gandalf come striding up through the dusk. The sky was clear and the stars were growing bright. "It's going to be a fine night," he said aloud. "That's good for a beginning. I feel like walking. I can't bear any more hanging about. I'm going to start and Gandalf must follow me." He turned to go back and then stopped, for he heard voices just round the corner by the end of Bagshot Row. One voice was certainly the old gaffer's. The other was strange and somehow unpleasant. He could not make out what it said, but he heard the gaffer's answer, which was rather shrill. The old man seemed put out. "No, Mr. Baggins has gone away. Went this morning, and my Sam went with him. Anyway, all his stuff went. Yes, sold out and gone, I tell ye." "Why? Why's none of my business or yours?" "Where to? That ain't no secret. He's moved to Buckleberry or some such place away down yonder." "Yes, it is, a tidy way. I've never been so far myself. They're queer folks in Buckland. No, I can't give no message. Good night to you." Footsteps went away down the hill. Frodo wondered vaguely why the fact that they did not come on up the hill seemed a great relief. "I'm sick of questions and curiosity about my doings, I suppose," he thought. "What an inquisitive lot they all are." He had half a mind to go and ask the gaffer who the inquirer was, but he thought better, or worse, of it, and turned and walked quickly back to Bag End. Pippin was sitting on his pack in the porch. Sam was not there. Frodo stepped inside the dark door. "Sam," he called. "Sam, time." "Coming, sir," came the answer from far within, followed soon by Sam himself wiping his mouth. He had been saying farewell to the beer barrel in the cellar. "All aboard, Sam?" said Frodo. "Yes, sir. I'll last for a bit now, sir." Frodo shut and locked the round door and gave the key to Sam. "Run down with us to your home, Sam," he said. "Then cuddle on the row and meet us as quick as you can at the gate in the lane beyond the meadows. We are not going through the village tonight. Too many ears pricking and eyes prying." Sam ran off at full speed. "Well, now we're off at last," said Frodo. They shouldered their packs and took up their sticks and walked round the corner to the west side of Bag End. "Goodbye," said Frodo, looking at the dark blank windows. He waved his hand and then turned and, following Bilbo, if he had known it, hurried after Peregrine down the garden path. They jumped over the low place in the hedge at the bottom and took to the fields, passing into the darkness like a rustle in the grasses. At the bottom of the hill on its western side, they came to the gate opening onto a narrow lane. There they halted and adjusted the straps of their packs. Presently Sam appeared, trotting quickly and breathing hard. His heavy pack was hoisted high on his shoulders, and he had put on his head a tall, shapeless felt bag, which he called a hat. In the gloom he looked very much like a dwarf. "I'm sure you have given me the heaviest stuff," said Frodo. I pity snails and all that they carry their homes on their backs. I could take a lot more yet, sir. My packet is quite light, said Sam, stoutly and untruthfully. No, you don't, Sam, said Pippin. It is good for him. He's got nothing except what he ordered us to pack. He's been slack lately, and he'll feel the weight less when he's walked off some of his own. Be kind to a poor old hobbit, laughed Frodo. I shall be as thin as a willow wand, I'm sure, before I get to Buckland. But I was talking nonsense. I suspect you've taken more than your share, Sam, and I shall look into it at our next packing. He picked up his stick again. Well, we all like walking in the dark, he said, so let's put some miles behind us before bed. For a short way they followed the lane westward. Then, leaving it, they turned left and took quietly to the fields again. They went in single file along hedgerows and the borders of coppices, and night fell dark about them. In their dark cloaks they were as invisible as if they all had magic rings. Since they were all hobbits and were trying to be silent, they made no noise that even hobbits would hear. Even the wild things in the fields and woods hardly noticed their passing. After some time they crossed the water west of Hobbiton by a narrow plank bridge. The stream was there no more than a winding black ribbon, bordered with leaning alder trees. A mile or two further south they hastily crossed the great road from the Brandywine Bridge. They were now in the Tookland, and bending southeastward they made for the Green Hill country. As they began to climb its first slopes, they looked back and saw the lamps in Hobbiton far off, twinkling in the gentle valley of the water. Soon it disappeared in the folds of the darkened land, and was followed by Bywater beside its great pool. When the light of the last farm was far behind, peeping among the trees, Frodo turned and waved a hand in farewell. I wonder if I shall ever look down into that valley again, he said quietly. When they had walked for about 3 hours, they rested. The night was clear, cool, and starry, but smoke-like wisps of mist were creeping up the hillsides from the streams and deep meadows. Thin-clad birches swayed in a light wind above their heads, made a black net against the pale sky. They ate a very frugal supper for hobbits, and then went on again. Soon they struck a narrow road that went rolling up and down, fading gray into the darkness ahead. The road to Woodhall and Stock and the Bucklebury Ferry. It climbed away from the main road in the water valley and wound over the skirts of the green hills towards Woody End, a wild corner of East Farthing. After a while they plunged into a deeply cloven track between tall trees that rustled their dry leaves in the night. It was very dark. At first they talked or hummed a tune softly together, being now far away from inquisitive ears. Then they marched on in silence, and Pippin began to lag behind. At last they began to climb a steep slope. He stopped and yawned. I am so sleepy, he said, that soon I shall fall down on the road. Are you going to sleep on your legs? It is nearly midnight. I thought you liked walking in the dark, said Frodo. But there is no great hurry. Mary expects us sometime the day after tomorrow, but that leaves us nearly 2 days more. We'll halt at the first likely spot. The wind's in the west, said Sam. If we get to the other side of this hill, we shall find a spot that is sheltered and snug enough, sir. There is a dry fir wood just ahead, if I remember rightly. Sam knew the land well within 20 miles of Hobbiton, but that was the limit of his geography. Just over the top of the hill they came on the patch of firwood. Leaving the road, they went into the deep resin-scented darkness of the trees and gathered dead sticks and cones to make a fire. Soon they had a merry crackle of flame at the foot of a large fir tree, and they sat round it for a while until they began to nod. Then, each in an angle of the great tree's roots, they curled up in their cloaks and blankets and were soon fast asleep. They set no watch. Even Frodo feared no danger yet, for they were still in the heart of the Shire. A few creatures came and looked at them when the fire had died away. A fox passing through the wood on business of his own stopped several minutes and sniffed. Hobbits, he thought. Well, what next? I have heard of strange doings in this land, but I have seldom heard of a hobbit sleeping out of doors under a tree. 3 of them. There's something mighty queer behind this. He was quite right, but he never found out any more about it. The morning came, pale and clammy. Frodo woke up first and found that a tree root had made a hole in his back and that his neck was stiff. Walking for pleasure, why didn't I drive, he thought, as he usually did at the beginning of an expedition. And all my beautiful feather beds are sold to the Sackville Bagginses. These tree roots would do them good, he stretched. Wake up, hobbits, he cried. It's a beautiful morning. What's beautiful about it? Said Pippin, peering over the edge of his blanket with one eye. Sam, get breakfast ready for 9:30. Have you got the bathwater hot? Sam jumped up, looking rather bleary. No, sir, I haven't, sir, he said. Frodo stripped the blankets from Pippin and rolled him over, and then walked off to the edge of the wood. Away eastward the sun was rising red out of the mists that lay thick on the world. Touched with gold and red, the autumn trees seemed to be sailing rootless in a shadowy sea. A little below him to the left, the road ran down steeply into a hollow and disappeared. When he returned, Sam and Pippin had got a good fire going. Water! Shouted Pippin. Where's the water? I don't keep water in my pockets, said Frodo. We thought you had gone to find some, said Pippin, busy setting out the food and cups. You had better go now. You can come too, said Frodo, and bring all the water bottles. There was a stream at the foot of the hill. They filled their bottles and the small camping kettle at a little fall where the water fell a few feet over an outcrop of gray stone. It was icy cold, and they spluttered and puffed as they bathed their faces and hands. When their breakfast was over and their packs all trussed up again, it was after 10 o'clock, and the day was beginning to turn fine and hot. They went down the slope and across the stream where it dived under the road, and up the next slope, and up and down another shoulder of the hills, and by that time their cloaks, blankets, water, food, and other gear already seemed a heavy burden. The day's march promised to be warm and tiring work. After some miles, however, the road ceased to roll up and down. It climbed to the top of a steep bank in a weary, zigzagging sort of way, and then prepared to go down for the last time. In front of them they saw the lower lands dotted with small clumps of trees that melted away in the distance to a brown woodland haze. They were looking across the woody end towards the Brandywine River. The road wound away before them like a piece of string. The road goes on forever, said Pippin, but I can't without a rest. It is high time for lunch. He sat down on the bank at the side of the road and looked away east into the haze, beyond which lay the river and the end of the shire in which he had spent all his life. Sam stood by him. His round eyes were wide open, for he was looking across lands he had never seen to a new horizon. Do elves live in those woods? He asked. Not that I have ever heard, said Pippin. Frodo was silent. He too was gazing eastward along the road, as if he had never seen it before. Suddenly he spoke aloud, but as if to himself, saying slowly, The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow, if I can, pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger sway, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then I cannot say. That sounds like a bit of old Bilbo's rhyming, said Pippin. Or is it one of your imitations? It does not sound altogether encouraging. I don't know, said Frodo. It came to me then, as if I was making it up, but I may have heard it long ago. Certainly it reminds me very much of Bilbo in the last years, before he went away. He used often to say there was only one road, that it was like a great river. Its springs were at every doorstep, and every path was its tributary. It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out of your door, he used to say. You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there is no knowing where you might be swept off to. Do you realize that this is the very path that goes through Mirkwood, and that if you let it, it might take you to the lonely mountains or even further and to worse places. He used to say that on the path outside the front door at Bag End, especially after he had been out for a long walk. "Well, the road won't sweep me anywhere for an hour at least," said Pippin, slipping his pack off. The others followed his example, putting their packs against the bank and their legs out into the road. After a rest, they took a good lunch and then more rest. The sun was beginning to get low, and the light of afternoon was on the land as they went down the hill. So far they had not met a soul on the road. This way was not much used, being hardly fit for carts, and there was little traffic to the woody end. They had been jogging along again for an hour or more when Sam stopped for a moment as if listening. They were now on level ground, and the road after much winding lay straight ahead, the grassland sprinkled with tall trees, outliers of the approaching woods. "I can hear a pony or a horse coming along the road behind," said Sam. They looked back, but the turn of the road prevented them from seeing far. "I wonder if that is Gandalf coming after us," said Frodo, but even as he said it, he had a feeling that it was not so, and a sudden desire to hide from the view of the rider came over him. "It may not matter much," he said apologetically, "but I would rather not be seen on the road by anyone. I am sick of my doings being noticed and discussed, and if it is Gandalf," he added as an afterthought, "we can give him a little surprise to pay him out for being so late. Let's get out of sight." The other two ran quickly to the left and down into a little hollow, not far from the road. There they lay flat. Frodo hesitated for a second. Curiosity or some other feeling was struggling with his desire to hide. The sound of hoofs drew nearer. Just in time he threw himself down in a patch of long grass behind a tree that overshadowed the road. Then he lifted his head and peered cautiously over one of the great roots. Round the corner came a large black horse, no hobbit pony, but a full-sized horse, and on it sat a large man who seemed to crouch in the saddle, wrapped in a great black cloak and hood, so that only his boots and the high stirrups showed below. His face was shadowed and invisible. When it reached the tree and was level with Frodo, the horse stopped. The riding figure was quite still, with its head bowed, as if listening. From inside the hood came a noise as of someone sniffing to catch an elusive scent. The head turned from side to side of the road. A sudden, unreasoning fear of discovery laid hold of Frodo, and he thought of his ring. He hardly dared to breathe, and yet the desire to get it out of his pocket became so strong that he began slowly to move his hand. He felt that he had only to slip it on, and then he would be safe. The advice of Gandalf seemed absurd. Bilbo had used the ring, and I am still in the Shire, he thought as his hand touched the chain on which it hung. At that moment the rider sat up and shook the reins. The horse stepped forward, walking slowly at first, and then breaking into a quick trot. Frodo crawled to the edge of the road and watched the rider until he dwindled into the distance. He could not be quite sure, but it seemed to him that suddenly, before it passed out of sight, the horse turned aside and went into the trees on the right. "Well, I call that very queer, and indeed disturbing," said Frodo to himself as he walked towards his companions. Pippin and Sam had remained flat in the grass and had seen nothing, so Frodo described the rider and his strange behavior. "I can't say why, but I felt certain he was looking or smelling for me, and also I felt certain that I did not want him to discover me. I've never seen or felt anything like it in the Shire before." "And what has one of the big people got to do with us?" said Pippin. "And what is he doing in this part of the world?" "There are some men about," said Frodo. "Down in the South Farthing, they have had trouble with big people, I believe. But I have never heard of anything like this rider. I wonder where he comes from." "Begging your pardon," said Sam suddenly, "I know where he comes from. It's from Hobbiton that this here Black Rider comes, unless there's more than one. and I know where he's going to." "What do you mean?" said Frodo sharply, looking at him in astonishment. "Why didn't you speak up before?" "I have only just remembered, sir. It was like this. When I got back to our hole yesterday evening with the key, my dad, he says to me, 'Hello, Sam,' he says. 'I thought you were away with Mr. Frodo this morning. There's been a strange customer asking for Mr. Baggins of Bag End, and he's only just gone. I've sent him on to Buckleberry.' Not that I liked the sound of him. He seemed mighty put out when I told him Mr. Baggins had left his old home for good. He hissed at me, he did. It gave me quite a shudder. 'What sort of a fellow was he?' says I to the gaffer. 'I don't know,' says he, 'but he wasn't a hobbit. He was tall and black-like, and he stooped over me. I reckon it was one of the big folk from foreign parts. He spoke funny.' I couldn't stay to hear more, sir, since you were waiting, and I didn't give much heed to it myself. The gaffer is getting old and more than a bit blind, and it must have been near dark when this fellow came up the hill and found him taking the air at the end of our row. I hope he hasn't done no harm, sir, nor me." "The gaffer can't be blamed anyway," said Frodo. "As a matter of fact, I heard him talking to a stranger who seemed to be inquiring for me, and I nearly went and asked him who it was. Wish I had, or you had told me about it before. I might have been more careful on the road." "Still, there may be no connection between this rider and the gaffer's stranger," said Pippin. "We left Hobbiton secretly enough, and I don't see how he could have followed us." "What about the smelling, sir?" said Sam. "And the gaffer said he was a black chap." "I wish I had waited for Gandalf," Frodo muttered, "but perhaps it would have only made matters worse." "Then you know or guess something about this rider," said Pippin, who had caught the muttered words. "I don't know, and I would rather not guess," said Frodo. "All right, Cousin Frodo, you can keep your secret for the present if you want to be mysterious. In the meantime, what are we to do? I should like a bite and a sup, but somehow I think we had better move on from here. Your talk of sniffing riders with invisible noses has unsettled me." "Yes, I think we will move on now," said Frodo, "but not on the road, in case that rider comes back or another follows him. We ought to do a good step more today. Buckland is still miles away." The shadows of the trees were long and thin on the grass, and they started off again. They now kept a stone's throw to the left of the road, and kept out of sight of it as much as they could. But this hindered them, for the grass was thick and tussocky, and the ground uneven, and the trees began to draw together into thickets. The sun had gone down red behind the hills at their backs, and evening was coming on before they came back to the road at the end of the long level over which it had run straight for some miles. At that point it bent left and went down into the lowlands of the Yale, making for Stock, but a lane branched right, winding through a wood of ancient oak trees on its way to Woodhall. "That is the way for us," said Frodo. Not far from the road meeting they came on the huge bulk of a tree. It was still alive and had leaves on the small branches that it had put out round the broken stumps of its long-fallen limbs, but it was hollow and could be entered by a great crack on the side away from the road. The hobbits crept inside and sat there upon a floor of old leaves and decayed wood. They rested and had a light meal, talking quietly and listening from time to time. The twilight was about them as they crept back to the lane. The west wind was sighing in the branches. Leaves were whispering. Soon the road began to fall gently but steadily into the dusk. A star came out above the trees in the darkening east before them. They went abreast and in step to keep up their spirit. After a time the stars grew thicker and brighter. The feeling of disquiet left them, and they no longer listened for the sound of hoofs. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Bilbo Baggins had made the words to a tune that was as old as the hills, and taught it to Frodo as they walked in the lanes of the Water Valley and talked about adventures. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed. But not yet weary are our feet, still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower and leaf and grass, let them pass, let them pass. Hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate. And though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way, and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn, and nut and sloe, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and well, fare you well, fare you well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadows to the edge of night, until the stars are all alight. Then world behind and home ahead we'll wander back to home and bed. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, and then to bed. The song ended. And now to bed, and now to bed, sang Pippin in a high voice. Hush, said Frodo, I think I hear hoofs again. They stopped suddenly and stood as silent as tree shadows, listening. There was a sound of hoofs in the lane, some way behind, but coming slow and clear down the road. Quickly and quietly they slipped off the path and ran into the deeper shade under the oak trees. Don't let us go too far, said Frodo. I don't want to be seen, but I want to see if it is another Black Rider. Very well, said Pippin, but don't forget the sniffing. The hoofs drew nearer. They had no time to find any hiding place better than the general darkness under the trees. Sam and Pippin crouched behind a large tree bole, while Frodo crept back a few yards towards the lane. It showed gray and pale, a line of fading light through the wood. Above it the stars were thick in the dim sky, but there was no moon. The sound of hoofs stopped. As Frodo watched, he saw something dark pass across the lighter space between two trees, and then halt. It looked like the black shade of a horse led by a smaller black shadow. The black shadow stood close to the point where they had left the path, and it swayed from side to side. Frodo thought he heard the sound of snuffling. The shadow bent to the ground and then began to crawl towards him. Once more the desire to slip on the ring came over Frodo, but this time it was stronger than before. So strong that, almost before he realized what he was doing, his hand was groping in his pocket. But at that moment there came a sound like mingled song and laughter. Clear voices rose and fell in the starlit air. The black shadow straightened up and retreated. It climbed on to the shadowy horse and seemed to vanish across the lane into the darkness on the other side. Frodo breathed again. "Elves!" exclaimed Sam in a hoarse whisper. "Elves, sir!" He would have burst out of the trees and dashed off towards the voices if they had not pulled him back. "Yes, it is elves," said Frodo. "One can meet them sometimes in the woody end. They don't live in the Shire, but they wander into it in spring and autumn, out of their own lands, away towards the Tower Hills. I am thankful that they do. You did not see, but that Black Rider stopped just here and was actually crawling towards us when the song began. As soon as he heard the voices, he slipped away." "What about the elves?" said Sam, too excitable to trouble about the rider. "Can't we go and see them?" "Listen, they are coming this way," said Frodo. "We have only to wait." The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound blending into the melody seemed to shape itself in their thoughts into words which they only partly understood. This was the song as Frodo heard it. Snow white, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here amid the world of woven trees. Guthoniel, O Elbereth, clear are thy eyes and bright thy breath. Snow white, we sing to thee in a far land across the sea. O stars that in the sunless year with shining hand by her were sown, In windy fields now bright and clear, we see your silver blossom blown. O Elbereth, Gilthoniel, we still remember, we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas. The song ended. These are high elves. They spoke the name of Elbereth, said Frodo in amazement. Few of that fairest folks are ever seen in the Shire. Not many now remain in Middle-earth, east of the great sea. This is indeed a strange chance. The hobbits sat in shadow by the wayside. Before long the elves came down the lane towards the valley. They passed slowly, and the hobbits could see the starlight glimmering on their hair and in their eyes. They bore no lights, yet as they walked a shimmer, like the light of the moon above the rim of the trees before it rises, seemed to fall about their feet. They were now silent, and as the last elf passed, he turned and looked towards the hobbits and laughed. "Hail, Frodo," he cried. "You are abroad late, or are you perhaps lost?" Then he called aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered round. "This is indeed wonderful," they said. 3 hobbits in a wood at night. We have not seen such a thing since Bilbo went away. What is the meaning of it?" "The meaning of it, fair people," said Frodo, "is simply that we seem to be going the same way as you are. I like walking under the stars, but I would welcome your company." "But we have no need of other company, and hobbits are so dull," they laughed. "And how do you know that we go the same way as you? For you do not know whither we are going." "And how do you know my name?" asked Frodo in return. "We know many things," they said. "We have seen you often before with Bilbo, though you may not have seen us." "Who are you, and who is your lord?" asked Frodo. "I am Gildor," answered their leader, the elf who had first hailed him. "Gildor Inglorian of the house of Finrod. We are exiles, and most of our kindred have long ago departed, and we too are now only tarrying here a while, ere we return over the great sea. But some of our kinfolk dwell still in peace in Rivendell. Come now, Frodo, tell us what you are doing, for we see that there is some shadow of fear upon you." "O wise people," interrupted Pippin eagerly, "tell us about the Black Riders." "Black Riders," they said in low voices. "Why do you ask about Black Riders?" "Because 2 Black Riders have overtaken us today, or one has done so twice," said Pippin. "Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew near." The elves did not answer at once, but spoke together softly in their own tongue. At length Gildor turned to the hobbits. "We will not speak of this here," he said. "We think you had best come now with us. It is not our custom, but for this time we will take you on our road, and you shall lodge with us tonight, if you will." "O fair folk, this is good fortune beyond my hope," said Pippin. Sam was speechless. "I thank you indeed, Gilgor Inglorian," said Frodo, bowing. "Elen silla lumen omentielvo. A star shines on the hour of our meeting," he added in the High Elven speech. "Be careful, friends," cried Gilgor, laughing. "Speak no secrets. Here is a scholar in the ancient tongue. Bilbo was a good master. Hail, elf friend," he said, bowing to Frodo. "Come now with your friends and join our company. You had best walk in the middle so that you may not stray. You may be weary before we halt." "Why, where are we going?" asked Frodo. "For tonight we go to the woods on the hill above Woodhall. It is some miles, but you shall have rest at the end of it, and it will shorten your journey tomorrow." They now marched on again in silence and passed like shadows in faint lights, for elves, even more than hobbits, could walk when they wished without sound or footfall. Pippin soon began to feel sleepy and staggered once or twice, but each time a tall elf at his side put out his arm and saved him from a fall. Sam walked along at Frodo's side, as if in a dream, with an expression on his face half of fear and half of astonished joy. The woods on either side became denser. The trees were now younger and thicker, and as the lane went lower, running down into a fold of the hills, there were many deep breaks of hazel on the rising slopes at either hand. At last the elves turned aside from the path. A green ride lay almost unseen through the thickets on the right, and this they followed as it wound away back up the wooded slopes, on to the top of a shoulder of the hills that stood out into the lower land of the river valley. Suddenly they came out of the shadow of the trees, and before them lay a wide space of grass, gray under the night. On 3 sides the woods pressed upon it, but eastward the ground fell steeply, and the tops of the dark trees, growing at the bottom of the slope, were below their feet. Beyond, the low lands lay dim and flat under the stars. Nearer at hand, a few lights twinkled in the village of Woodhall. The elves sat on the grass and spoke together in soft voices. They seemed to take no further notice of the hobbits. Frodo and his companions wrapped themselves in cloaks and blankets, and drowsiness stole over them. The night grew on, and the lights in the valley went out. Pippin fell asleep, pillowed on a green hillock. Away high in the east swung Remarath, the netted stars, and slowly above the mists red Borgil rose, glowing like a jewel of fire. Then by some shift of airs all the mist was drawn away like a veil, and there leaned up, as he climbed over the rim of the world, the swordsman of the sky, Menelgulbur, with his shining belt. The elves all burst into song. Suddenly under the trees a fire sprang up with a red light. "Come," the elves called to the hobbits. "Come, now is the time for speech and merriment." Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered. "There's a fire in the hall and food for hungry guests," said an elf standing before him. At the south end of the greenwoods there was an opening. There the green floor ran on into the woods and formed a wide space like a hall, roofed by the boughs of trees. Their great trunks ran like pillars down each side. In the middle there was a wood fire blazing, and upon the tree pillars, torched with lights of gold and silver, were burning steadily. The elves sat round the fire upon the grass or upon the sawn rings of old trunks. Some went to and fro bearing cups and pouring drink. Others brought food on heaped plates and dishes. "This is poor fare," they said to the hobbits, "for we are lodging in the greenwood far from our halls. If ever you are guests at home, if ever you are our guests at home, we will treat you better." "It seems to me good enough for a birthday party," said Frodo. Pippin afterward recalled little of either food or drink, for his mind was filled with the light upon the elf faces, and the sound of voices so various and so beautiful that he felt in a waking dream. But he remembered that there was bread, surpassing the savor of a fair white loaf to one who is starving, and fruits sweet as wild berries and richer than the tended fruits of gardens. He drained a cup that was filled with a fragrant draught, cool as a clear fountain, golden as a summer afternoon. Sam could not describe in words nor picture clearly to himself what he felt or thought that night, though it remained in his memory as one of the chief events of his life. The nearer he ever got was to say, "Well, sir, if I could grow apples like that, I would call myself a gardener. But it was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean." Frodo sat, eating, drinking, and talking with delight, but his mind was chiefly on the words spoken. He knew a little of the elf speech and listened eagerly. Now again he spoke to those that served him and thanked them in their own language. They smiled at him and said, laughing, "Here is a jewel among hobbits." After a while Pippin fell fast asleep, and was laid up and borne away to a bower under the trees, where he was laid upon a soft bed and slept the rest of the night away. Sam refused to leave his master. When Pippin had gone, he came and sat curled up at Frodo's feet, where at last he nodded and closed his eyes. Frodo remained long awake, talking with Gilder. They spoke of many things, old and new, and Frodo questioned Gilder about much about happenings in the wide world outside the Shire. The tidings were mostly sad and ominous, of gathering darkness, the wars of men, and the flight of the elves. At last Frodo asked the question that was nearer to his heart. "Tell me, Gilder, have you ever seen Bilbo since he left?" Gilder smiled. "Yes," he answered, "twice. He said farewell to us on this very spot. But I saw him once again, far from here." He would say no more about Bilbo, and Frodo fell silent. "You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo," said Gilder. But I already know a little, and I can read more in your face and to the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt you will find what you seek or accomplish what you intend, or that you will ever return. Is not that so? It is, said Frodo. But I thought my going was a secret known only to Gandalf and my faithful Sam. He looked down at Sam, who was snoring gently. The secret will not reach the enemy from us, said Gildor. The enemy, said Frodo. Then you know why I am leaving the Shire. I do not know for what reason the enemy is pursuing you, answered Gildor, but I perceive that he is, strange indeed though that seems to me. And I warn you that peril is now both before you and behind you, and upon either side. You mean the riders? I feared that they were servants of the enemy. What are the Black Riders? Has Gandalf told you nothing? Nothing about such creatures. Then I think it is not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. For it seems to me that you have set out only just in time, if indeed you are in time. You must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection for you. I cannot imagine what information could be more terrifying than your hints and warnings, exclaimed Frodo. I know that danger lay ahead, of course, but I did not expect to meet it in our own Shire. Can't a hobbit walk from the water to the river in peace? But it is not your own Shire, said Gildor. Others dwelt here before hobbits were, and others will dwell here again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out. I know, and yet it has always seemed so safe and secure. What can I do now? My plan was to leave the Shire secretly and make my way to Rivendell, but now my footsteps are dogged, even before I get to Buckland. I think you should still follow that plan, said Gildor, but do not think the road will prove too hard for your courage. But if you desire clearer counsel, you should ask Gandalf. I do not know the reason for your flight, and therefore I do not know by what means your pursuers will assail you. These things Gandalf must know. I suppose that you will see him before you leave the Shire. I hope so, but that is another thing that makes me anxious. I have been expecting Gandalf for many days. He was to have come to Hobbiton at the latest 2 nights ago, but he has never appeared. Now I am wondering what can have happened. Should I wait for him? Gildor was silent for a few moments. I do not like this news, he said at last. That Gandalf should be late does not bode well, but it is said, do not meddle in the affair of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours to go or wait. And it is also said, answered Frodo, do not go to elves for counsels, for they will say both no and yes. Is it indeed? laughed Gildor. Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. But what about you? You have not told me all concerning yourself, and how then shall I choose better than you? But if you demand advice, I will for friendship's sake give it. I think you should now go at once, without delay, and if Gandalf does not come before you set out, then I will advise this, do not go alone. Take such friends as are trusty and willing. Now you should be grateful, for I do not give this counsel gladly. The elves have their own labors and their own sorrows, and they are little concerned with the ways of hobbits, or of any other creatures upon earth. Our paths cross there seldom, by chance or purpose. In this meaning there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much. I am deeply grateful, said Frodo, but I wish you would tell me plainly what the Black Riders are. If I take your advice, I may not see Gandalf for a long while, and I ought to know what is the danger that pursues me. Is it not enough to know that they are servants of the enemy? Answered Gildor. Flee them, speak no words to them. They are deadly. Ask no more of me. But my heart forebodes that, ere all is ended, you, Frodo, son of Drogo, will know more of these fell things than Gildor and Glorian. May Elbereth protect you." "But where shall I find courage?" asked Frodo. "That is what I chiefly need." "Courage is found in unlikely places," said Gildor. "Be of good hope. Sleep now. In the morning we shall have gone, but we will send our messages through the lands. The wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those that have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you elf friend, and may the stars shine upon the end of the world. May the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom have we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear words of the ancient speech from the lips of other wanderers in the world." Frodo felt sleep coming upon him, even as Gildor finished speaking. "I will sleep now," he said, and the elf led him to a bower beside Pippin, and he threw himself upon a bed and fell at once into a dreamless slumber. And that is the end of chapter 3. Now we are on to chapter 4. Take a drink. Chapter 4, A Shortcut to Mushrooms. In the morning, Frodo woke refreshed. He was lying in a bower made of a living tree with branches laced and drooping to the ground. His bed was of fern and grass, deep and soft and strangely fragrant. The sun was shining through the fluttering leaves, which were still green upon the tree. He jumped up and went out. Sam was sitting on the grass near the edge of the wood. Pippin was standing studying the sky and weather. There was no sign of the elves. "They have left us fruit and drink and bread," said Pippin. "Come and have your breakfast. The bread tastes almost as good as it did last night. I did not want to leave you any, but Sam insisted." Frodo sat down beside Sam and began to eat. "What is the plan for today?" said Pippin. "To walk to Buckleberry as quickly as possible," answered Frodo, and gave his attention to the food. "Do you think we shall see anything of those riders?" asked Pippin cheerfully. Under the morning sun, the prospect of seeing a whole troop of them did not seem very alarming to him. "Yes, probably," said Frodo, not liking the reminder. "But I hope to get across the river without their seeing us." "Did you find out anything about them from Gildor?" "Not much, only hints and riddles," said Frodo evasively. "Did you ask about the sniffing?" "We didn't discuss it," said Frodo with his mouth full. "You should have. I'm sure it is very important." "In that case, I'm sure Gildor would have refused to explain it," said Frodo sharply. "And now leave me in peace for a bit. I don't want to answer a string of questions while I am eating. I want to think." "Good heavens," said Pippin. "At breakfast?" He walked away towards the edge of the green. From Frodo's mind, the bright morning, treacherously bright, he thought, had not banished the fear of pursuit, and he pondered the words of Gildor. The merry voice of Pippin came to him. He was running on the green turf and singing. "No, I could not," he said to himself. "It is one thing to take my young friends walking over the Shire with me until we are hungry and weary and food and bed are sweet. To take them into exile, where hunger and weariness may have no cure, is quite another, even if they are willing to come. The inheritance is mine alone. I don't think I ought even to take Sam." He looked at Sam Gamgee and discovered that Sam was watching him. "Well, Sam," he said, "what about it? I am leaving the Shire as soon as ever I can. In fact, I have made up my mind now not even to wait a day at Crickhollow, if it can be helped." "Very good, sir." "You still mean to come with me?" "I do." "It is going to be very dangerous, Sam. It is already dangerous. Most likely neither of us will come back." "If you don't come back, sir, then I shan't, and that's certain," said Sam. "Don't you leave him," they said to me. "Leave him," I said. I never mean to. I am going with him if he climbs to the moon, and if any of those Black Riders try to stop him, they'll have Sam Ganji to reckon with, I said. They laughed. Who are they, and what are you talking about? The elves, sir. We had some talk last night, and they seemed to know you were going away, so I didn't see the use of denying it. Wonderful folk, elves, sir. Wonderful. They are, said Frodo. Do you like them still, now you've had a closer view? They seem a bit above my likes and dislikes, so to speak, answered Sam slowly. It don't seem to matter what I think about them. They are quite different from what I expected. So old and young and so gay and sad, as it were. Frodo looked at Sam rather startled, half expecting to see some outward sign of the odd change that seemed to have come over him. It did not sound like the voice of the old Sam Ganji that he thought he knew. But it looked like the old Sam Ganji sitting there, except that his face was unusually thoughtful. Do you feel any need to leave the Shire now that your wish to see them has come true already? He asked. Yes, sir. I don't know how to say it, but after last night I feel different. I seem to see ahead in a kind of way. I know we are going to take a very long road into darkness, but I know I can't turn back. It isn't to see elves now, nor dragons, nor mountains, that I want. I don't rightly know what I want. But I have something to do before the end, and it lies ahead, not in the Shire. I must see it through, sir, if you understand me. I don't altogether, but I understand that Gandalf chose me a good companion. I am content. We will go together. Frodo finished his breakfast in silence. Then standing up, he looked over the land ahead and called to Pippin. All ready to start, he said as Pippin ran up. We must be getting off at once. We slept late, and there are a good many miles to go. You slept late, you mean, said Pippin. I was up long before, and we are only waiting for you to finish eating and thinking. I have finished both now, and I am going to make for Buckberry Ferry as quickly as possible. I am not going out of the way back to the road we left last night. I am going to cut straight across country from here. Then you are going to fly, said Pippin. You won't cut straight on foot anywhere in this country. We can cut straighter than the road anyway, answered Frodo. The ferry is east from Woodhall, but the hard road curves away to the left. You can see a bend of it away north over there. It goes round the north end of the marsh, so as to strike the causeway from the bridge above Stock. But that is miles out of the way. We could save a quarter of the distance if we made a line for the ferry from where we stand. Short cuts make long delays, argued Pippin. The country is rough round here, and there are bogs and all kinds of difficulties down in the marsh. I know the land in these parts, and if you are worrying about Black Riders, I can't see that it is any worse meeting them on a road than in a wood or a field. It is less easy to find people in the woods and fields, answered Frodo. And if you are looking to be on the road, there is some chance that you will be looking for on the road and not off it. All right, said Pippin. I will follow you in every bog and ditch. But it is hard. I'd counted on passing the Golden Perch at Stock before sundown. The best beer in East Farthing, or used to be. It is a long time since I tasted it. That settles it, said Frodo. Shortcuts make delays, but inns make longer ones. At all costs, we must keep you away from the Golden Perch. We want to get to Buckleberry before dark. What do you say, Sam? I will go along with you, Mr. Frodo, said Sam, in spite of private misgivings and a deep regret for the best beer in East Farthing. And if we are going to toil through bog and briar, let's go now, said Pippin. It was already nearly as hot as it had been the day before, but clouds were beginning to come up from the west. It looked likely to turn to rain. The hobbits scrambled down a steep green bank and plunged into the thick trees below. Their course had been chosen to leave Woodhall to their left and to cut slanting through the woods that clustered along the eastern side of the hills until they reached the flats beyond. Then they could make straight for the ferry over country that was open, except for a few ditches and fences. Frodo reckoned they had 18 miles to go in a straight line. He soon found that the thicket was closer and more tangled than it had appeared. There were no paths in the undergrowth, and they did not get on very fast. When they had struggled to the bottom of the bank, they found a stream running down the hills behind in a deeply dug bed with steep, slippery sides overhung with brambles. Most inconveniently, it got across the line they had chosen. They could not jump over it, nor indeed get across it at all without getting wet, scratched, and muddy. They halted, wondering what to do. "First check," said Pippin, smiling grimly. Sam Gamgee looked back. Through an opening in the trees, he caught a glimpse of the top of the green bank from which they had climbed down. "Look," he said, clutching Frodo by the arm. They all looked, and on the edge high above them they saw against the sky a horse standing. Beside it stooped a black figure. They at once gave up any idea of going back. Frodo led the way and plunged quietly into the thick bushes beside the stream. "Phew," he said to Pippin. "We're both right. The shortcut has gone crooked already, but we got under cover only just in time. You've got sharp ears, Sam. Can you hear anything coming?" They stood still, almost holding their breaths as they listened, but there was no sound of pursuit. "I don't fancy he would try bringing his horse down that bank," said Sam, "but I guess he knows we came down it. We had better be going." Going on was not altogether easy. They had packs to carry, and the bushes and brambles were reluctant to let them through. They were cut off from the wind by the ridge behind, and the air was still and stuffy. When they forced their way at last into more open ground, they were hot and tired and very scratched. They were also no longer certain of the direction in which they were going. The banks of the stream sank as it reached the levels and became broader and shallower, wandering off towards the marsh and the river. "Why, this is Stockbrook," said Pippin. "If we are going to try and get back onto our course, we must cross at once and bear right." They waded the stream and hurried over a wide-open space, rush-grown and treeless, on the farthest side. Beyond that, they came again to a belt of trees, tall oaks for the most part, with here and there an elm tree or an ash. The ground was fairly level, and there was little undergrowth, but the trees were too close for them to see far ahead. The leaves blew upwards in sudden gusts of wind, and spots of rain began to fall from the overcast sky. Then the wind died away and the rain came streaming down. They trudged along as fast as they could over patches of grass and through thick drifts of old leaves, and all about them the rain pattered and trickled. They did not talk, but kept glancing back and from side to side. After half an hour, Pippin said, "I hope we have not turned too much towards the south and are not walking long ways through the wood. It is not a very broad belt. I should have said no more than a mile at the widest, and we ought to have been through it by now." "It is no good our starting to go in zigzags," said Frodo. "That won't mend matters. Let us keep on as we are going. I am not sure that I want to come out into the open yet." They went on for perhaps another couple of hours. Then the sun gleamed out of ragged clouds again, and the rain lessened. It was now past midday, and they felt it was high time for lunch. They halted under an elm tree. Its leaves were fast turning yellow, or still thick, and the ground at its feet was fairly dry and sheltered. When they came to make their meal, they found that the elves had filled their bottles with a clear drink, pale golden in color. It had the scent of a honey made of many flowers and was wonderfully refreshing. Very soon they were laughing and snapping their fingers at rain and at black riders. The last few miles, they felt, would soon be behind them. Frodo propped his back against the tree trunk and closed his eyes. Sam and Pippin sat near, and they began to hum, and then to sing softly. "Ho, ho, ho, to the bottle I go, to heal my heart and drown my woe. Rain may fall and wind may blow, and many miles be still to go. But under a tall tree I will lie, and let the clouds go sailing by. Ho, 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 they began again louder. They stopped short suddenly. Frodo sprang to his feet. A long-drawn wail came down the road, like the cry of some evil and lonely creature. It rose and fell, and suddenly, on a high piercing note, even as they sat and stood, as if suddenly frozen, it was answered by another cry, fainter and farther off, but no less chilling to the blood. There was then a silence, broken only by the sound of the wind in the leaves. "And what do you think that was?" Pippin asked at last, trying to speak lightly, but quavering a little. "If it was a bird, it was one I have never heard in the Shire before." "It was not a bird or beast," said Frodo. "It was a call, or a signal. There were words in that cry, though I could not catch them. But no hobbit has such a voice." No more was said about it. They were all thinking of the riders, but no one spoke of them. They were now reluctant either to go or stay on. But sooner or later they had got to get across the open country to the ferry, and it was best to go sooner and in daylight. In a few moments they had shouldered their packs again and were off. Before long the wood came to a sudden end. Wide grasslands stretched before them. They now saw that they had in fact turned too much to the south. Away over the flats they could glimpse the low hill of Buckleberry across the river, but it was now to their left. Creeping cautiously out from the edge of the trees, they set off across the open as quickly as they could. At first they felt afraid, away from the shelter of the wood. Far back behind them stood the high place where they had breakfast. Frodo half expected to see the small distant figure of a horseman on the ridge dark against the sky, but there was no sign of one. The sun, escaping from the breaking clouds as it sank towards the hills they had left, was now shining brightly again. Their fear left them, though they still felt uneasy. But the land became steadily more tame and well-ordered. Soon they came into well-tended fields and meadows. There were hedges and gates and dikes for drainage. Everything seemed quiet and peaceful, just an ordinary corner of the Shire. Their spirits rose with every step. The line of the river grew nearer, and the black riders began to seem like phantoms of the woods now left behind. They passed along the edge of a huge turnip field and came to a stout gate. Beyond it a rutted lane now ran between low, well-laid hedges towards a distant clump of trees. Pippin stopped. "I know these fields and this gate," he said. "This is Bamfurlong, old Farmer Maggot's land. That's his farm away there in the trees." "One trouble after another," said Frodo, looking nearly as much alarmed as if Pippin had declared the land was the slot leading to a dragon's den. The others looked at him in surprise. "What's wrong with old Maggot?" asked Pippin. "He's a good friend to all the Brandybucks. Of course he's a terror to trespassers and keeps ferocious dogs. But after all, folk down here are near the border and have to be more on their guard." "I know," said Frodo, "but all the same," he added with a shamefaced laugh, "I am terrified of him and his dogs. I have avoided his farm for years and years. He caught me several times trespassing after mushrooms when I was a youngster at Brandy Hall. On the last occasion he beat me and then took me and showed me to his dogs. 'See, lads,' he said, 'next time this young varmint sets foot on my land you can eat him. Now see him off.' They chased me all the way to the ferry. I have never got over the fright, though I dare say the beasts knew their business and would not really have touched me." Pippin laughed. "Well, it's time you made up, especially if you were coming back to live in Buckland. Old Maggot is really a stout fellow, if he leaves mushrooms alone. Let's get into the lane, and then we shan't be trespassing. If we meet him, I'll do the talking. He is a friend of Mary's, and I used to come here with him a good deal at one time." They went along the lane until they saw the thatched roofs of a large house and farm building peeping out among the trees ahead. The Maggots and the Pudafoots of stock, and most of the inhabitants of the Marish were house dwellers, and this farm was stoutly built of brick and had a high wall all round it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out of the wall into the lane. Suddenly, as they drew nearer, a terrific baying and barking broke out, and a loud voice was heard shouting, "Grip! Fang! Wolf! Come on, lads!" Frodo and Sam stopped dead, but Pippin walked on a few paces. The gate opened, and 3 huge dogs came pelting out into the lane and dashed towards the travelers, barking fiercely. They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank against the wall while 2 wolfish-looking dogs sniffed at him suspiciously and snarled if he moved. The largest and most ferocious of the 3 halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Through the gate there now appeared a broad, thick-set hobbit with a round red face. "Hallo, hallo, and who may you be, and what may you be wanting?" he asked. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maggot," said Pippin. The farmer looked at him closely. "Well, if it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say," he just cried, changing from a scowl to a grin. "It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going to set my dogs on any strangers. There are some funny things going on today. Of course we do get queer folk wandering in these parts at times. Too near the river," he said, shaking his head. "But this fellow is the most outlandish I have ever set eyes on. He won't cross my land without leave a second time, not if I can stop it." "What fellow do you mean?" asked Pippin. "Then you haven't seen him," said the farmer. "He went up the lane toward the causeway not a long while back. He was a funny customer, and asked funny questions, but perhaps you'll come inside, and we'll pass the news more comfortably. I've a drop of good ale on tap, if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took." It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them more if allowed to do it in his own time and fashion, so they all accepted the invitation. "What about the dogs?" asked Frodo anxiously. The farmer laughed. "They won't harm you, not unless I tell them to. Here, Grip, Fang, heel," he cried. "Heel, Wolf." To the relief of Frodo and Sam, the dogs walked away and let them go free. Pippin introduced the other 2 to the farmer. "Mr. Frodo Baggins," he said. "You may not remember him, but he used to live at Brandy Hall." At the name Baggins, the farmer started and gave Frodo a sharp glance. For a moment, Frodo thought that the memory of stolen mushrooms had been aroused, and that the dogs would be told to see him off. But Farmer Baggett took him by the arm. "Well, if that isn't queerer than ever," he explained. "Mr. Baggins, is it? Come inside, we must have a talk." They went into the farmer's kitchen and sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and Pippin found himself more than compensated for missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer suspiciously. He had a natural mistrust of the inhabitants of other parts of the Shire, and also he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master, however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, Farmer Maggot put down his mug and looked at them all in turn. "Now, Mr. Peregrine," he said, "where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Were you coming to visit me? For if so, you had gone past my gate without my seeing you." "Well, no," answered Pippin. "To tell you the truth, since you have guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We had come over your fields, but that was quite by accident. We lost our way in the woods, back near Woodhall, trying to take a short-cut to the ferry." "If you were in a hurry, the road would have served you better," said the farmer. "But I wasn't worrying about that. You have leave to walk over my land if you have a mind, Mr. Peregrine, and you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms." He laughed. "Yes, I recognize the name. I recollect the time a young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland. But it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I had just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me?" They waited anxiously for him to go on. "Well," the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish, "he came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, and cloaked and hooded up, as if he did not want to be known. Now what in the Shire can he want, I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border, and anyway, I had never heard of any like this Black Rider. "Good day to you," I says, going out to him. "This lane don't lead anywhere, and wherever you may be going, your quickest way will be back to the road." I didn't like the looks of him, and when Grip came out, he took one sniff and let out a yelp as if he had been stung. He put down his tail and bolted off howling. The black fellow sat quite still. "I come from yonder," he said, slow and stiff-like, pointing back west, over my fields, if you please. "Have you seen Baggins?" he asked in a queer voice, and bent down towards me. I could not see any face, for his hood fell down so low, and I felt a sort of shiver down my back. But I did not see why he should come riding over my land so bold. "Be off," I said. "There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You had better go back west to Hobbiton, but you can go by road this time." "Baggins has left," he answered in a whisper. "He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold." "No, I won't," I said. "You'll go back where you belong, double quick. I give you 1 minute before I call my dogs." He gave a sort of hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his great horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off and rode through the gate and up the lane toward the causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that? Frodo sat for a moment looking at the fire, but his only thought was how on earth would they reach the ferry. "I don't know what to think," he said at last. "Then I'll tell you what to think," said Maggot. "You should never have gone mixing yourself up with Hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer, up there." Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. "But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you had left the Brandybucks and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, this all comes to those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there is some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hill of Hobbiton, as I hear." Frodo said nothing. The shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting. "Well, Mr. Frodo," Maggot went on, "I'm glad that you've had the sense to come back to Buckland. My advice is, stay there, and don't get mixed up with these outlandish folks. You'll have friends in these parts. If any of these black fellows come after you again, I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead, or have left the Shire, or anything you like. And that might be true enough, for as like it as not, it is old Mr. Bilbo they want news of." "Maybe you're right," said Frodo, avoiding the farmer's eye and staring at the fire. Maggot looked at him thoughtfully. "Well, I see you have ideas of your own," he said. "It is plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon, and maybe my news was no great news to you after all. I am not asking you to tell me anything. You have a mind to keep to yourself. But I see you are in some kind of trouble. Perhaps you are thinking it won't be too easy to get to the ferry without being caught." "I was thinking so," said Frodo. "But we have got to try and get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I am afraid we must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I've been in terror of you and your dogs for over 30 years, Farmer Maggot, though you may laugh to hear it. It's a pity, for I've missed a good friend. And now I'm sorry to leave so soon, but I'll come back perhaps one day, if I get a chance." "You'll be welcome when you come," said Maggot. "But now I've a notion. It's near sundown already, and we are going to have our supper, for we mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be most pleased." "And so should we," said Frodo. "But we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it will be dark before we can reach the ferry. Oh, but wait a minute. I was going to say, after a bit of supper, I'll get out a small wagon, and I'll drive you all to the ferry. That will save you a good step, and it might also save you trouble of another sort." Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully, to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills, and the light was failing. 2 of Maggot's sons and 3 of his daughters came in, and a generous supper was laid on the large table. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farm household came in. In a short while, 14 sat down to eat. There was beer in plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and gnawed rinds and cracked bones. When they had finished, the farmer and his sons went out with a lantern and got the wagon ready. It was dark in the yard when the guests came out. They threw their packs on board and climbed in. The farmer sat in the driving seat and whipped up his 2 stout ponies. His wife stood in the light of the open door. "You be careful of yourself, Maggot," she called. "Don't go arguing with any foreigners, and come straight back." "I will," said he, and drove out of the gate. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and a chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or 2, the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike and climbing a short slope up onto the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of river mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. "It's going to be thick," said Maggot, "but I'll not light my lantern till I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight." It was 5 miles or more from Maggot's Lane to the ferry. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were strained for any sound above the creak of the wheel and the slow clop of the pony's hoofs. The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him, Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forward into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the ferry lane at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew in his ponies, and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading: hoofs on the road ahead. The sound was coming towards them. Maggot jumped down and stood holding the ponies' heads and peering forward into the gloom. Clip-clop, clip-clop, came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still, foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the right-abouts." He climbed out and went to the farmer's side. Black riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The rider was nearly on them. "Hullo there," called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark, cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or 2 ahead. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward. "Don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins." "Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice, but the voice was the voice of Mary Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and its light fell on the astonished face of the farmer. "Mr. Merry!" he cried. "Yes, of course. Who did you think it was?" said Merry, coming forward. As he came out of the mist and their fears subsided, he seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and a scarf was swathed around his neck and over his chin to keep out the fog. Frodo sprang out of the wagon to greet him. "So there you are at last," said Merry. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd turn up at all today, and I was just going back to supper. When it grew foggy, I came across and rode up towards Stocks to see if you'd fallen in any ditches. But I'm blessed if I know which way you have come." "Where did you find them, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond?" "No, I caught 'em trespassing," said the farmer, "and nearly set my dogs on 'em. But they'll tell you all the story, I've no doubt. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worrying with the night getting thick." He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. "Well, good night to you all," he said. "It's been a queer day, and no mistake, but all's well as ends well, though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now, when I do. He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly he produced a large basket from under the seat. "I was nearly forgetting," he said. "Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins, with her compliments." He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lantern as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. That is the end of this chapter, and I think that is where I am going to end the stream, because I'm a sleepy girl. But the good news is, now that there is no more overtime at work, I'm going to try to start streaming Friday nights and Saturday nights. Maybe Sundays, who knows. Tomorrow is going to be a soap making day. I shall be making lots and lots of soaps. So, I hope that you all have enjoyed this stream. I know it was kind of short. My streams usually are, but I am glad for all of you that came out. You know I love you all. And we shall say a good night. Nice smelling soaps. Yes, nice smelling soaps. I have got so many fragrance oils. So, I have decided that aliens, because my thing right now, I'm making alien soaps. And aliens smell like, if you ever, because I don't know, maybe it's just the thing here. There's a fragrance to a lot of the water fountains back before COVID, obviously, when you could go in places. There was like a fragrance that they could add to water that sounded like a fake beach, if that makes sense. Like what the ocean smells like in the mind of someone who's never been to the ocean. It smells kind of watery, kind of florally, very much like fruit punch. That is the smell of aliens to me. So my alien soaps, that's the scent that I am using in them. And then I'm going to be working on some more of the coffin soaps, because I love making those. But yes, tomorrow will be a soap day, and I'll be posting pictures to the Twitter and to the Discord. Beach. Yes. How people think. I know exactly the smell. There, I'm gonna say was, I don't know if it's still open. There used to be a hotel in Reno called Atlantis, and they had this thing inside the hotel. I should say inside, well, the hotel casino, and it was a water feature inside a casino. Really weird. And every now and then, like, it would come on like a, it was just really, really weird. But water would come through it, like, and it would make the sound of waves rushing, and the water would be coming through, and it was, of course, colored blue, because water is blue. And it would come through, and then it would stop, and there was this smell that I know was added to the water, but I also have smelled it in fountains. And like I said, it's like a fake beach smell. It smells like fruit and the fake watery smell in shampoos and stuff. And so yes, aliens smell like fake beach. I don't know why, but that's just what I've decided. And the demon cats smell like chocolate. And I don't know what other ones I will make. I need to find a pumpkin smell, because I have some cool pumpkin molds. So I should probably get a pumpkin spice smell, or a pumpkin smell, or a pumpkin pie smell. Something. Maybe I'll make the pumpkins smell like apples. That would freak people out. The pumpkins can smell like apples. Well, at any rate, good night. Thank you all for joining. Pumple. Yes, Pumple. It will be Pumples. Good night, friends. I hope that you had a good time. For those of you who will be heading off to sleep, I wish you sweet dreams. And with that, we shall end the stream, and if I work out a schedule, I will post the schedule in the Discord and on the Twitch channel. I'm not real big on schedules. My life doesn't always allow for it. But, oh, thank you. Yes, there is a link to the Discord. I hope the link still works. But we will be having more streams. And I'm hoping that I can eventually get enough soaps made that points can be used to redeem for the soaps. Someday I will figure out a way to send things internationally and not have it cost me $40. Postal service is my enemy. A pro soap stream. I would need a camera. I don't have a camera to be able to stream anything that uses a camera. That would probably be kind of cool to stream soap making. My soap making consists of like 90% me getting glitter all over myself, and 10% melting soap and putting the colorant in the soap and not myself. So I would love to get a GoPro and film soap making. That would probably be awesome. The best, worst things involve being covered with it. There is no worst thing about being covered in glitter. I love it. I deliberately do it. I've been making my own highlighter with the glitter and the mica, and I just go out in public now looking like an absolute disaster, and I don't care. My favorite cosmetic item was a highlighter from Makeup Addiction. It's called Snow Glow. Snow Gold, Snow Glow, I don't know. I would cover my whole face in it and go out and like blind everyone that looked at me. And it was awesome. Because there's something to be said for just reaching a point where you don't care. But also, I mean, like, I'm wearing a mask everywhere I go and there's not that many people really see me, but I don't care. I will be the glowing goddess. All I need is a tiara. Okay, you guys, we've been silly enough. I am silly. So I shall go and fix a snack, and then fixing a snack and then going to bed, probably not the best thing to do. Just go to bed. I need to just go to bed. So anyway, good night, and I will hopefully see you all soon. Sleep if that is where you are heading. Yes, owl. Sometimes I go very, very quiet. I can be quiet. Alright. Sleep well, friend. And good night. And let's hope the music isn't turned up too loud.
Initiating good night sequence. Dispersing appropriate dosage of compound 347. Initiating phase 1 of memory calibration. This won't hurt a bit. Just close your eyes.